Downtown parking lots. Deep down, let's face it, you know they're wrong. So today we're going to talk about why parking craters exist and why they're terrible. And then we're going to take a look at a major overhaul of the Parking Reform Network's Parking Maps feature as we count down the 10 best and the 10 worst US city downtowns when it comes to parking craters, and it's all coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer suggested topics always welcome, and this actually is a suggestion from the folks at the Parking Reform Network who asked if I wanted to premiere the updated maps and analysis they've been working on. And presenting someone else's analysis isn't really something I do on this channel, but I did have a bit of a hand in this since it was one of my patrons, Thomas Carpenito, who really brainstormed all of this over a year ago with some minor input from me, and then PRN really helped to make it fly. So today I'm sharing a major update of the parking maps. The project now includes all core cities in urbanized areas over 500,000, and it includes refined central business district boundaries for each city. The initial version of these parking maps was a big hit and shared widely, and I think the reason this stuff is so compelling is having parking, especially surface parking lots, in your downtown is such a conspicuous and telling sign of distress. It's bad enough that roadways and other basic transportation infrastructure take up something like a quarter of the land in what should be our most valuable urban locations, but when prime developable land is being used for the storage of private automobiles, that's just a clear and obvious sign that things aren't what they should be. Methodology, I'm not going to say a lot about this. I do think this project was very labor intensive, and one of the challenges you might not realize until you really think about it is defining the boundary for each city's downtown. I think it was my recommendation to use land use designations from each city's comprehensive plan map to demarcate the central business district, which is the basic approach here. But even doing that isn't that straightforward because comp plan maps and zoning maps tend to be such patchworks. One thing I do like about doing it this way, though, is that by focusing on areas that have a CBD designation, you really do know that you're looking at the urban land that's zoned for the most intense commercial and residential uses. What we're going to look at today is surface or structured parking as a percentage of the developable land area of the downtown in each city. So a low number is going to indicate a city that's found they have better things to do with their downtown than store people's private property for hours at a time, and a high number is going to indicate a city that hasn't figured that out yet. There's a lot more the PRN site is going to have when you go into it and look at it yourself. Like, they created their own parking score for each city, but it's a little tough to explain, so I'm just going to go with pure percentage of land area for this. Pitfalls of the 15-minute video format, but if you watch this channel, you know I'll usually sacrifice technical precision for something that's just easier to explain. The only other thing to clarify today, I'm looking at core cities in an urbanized area over 1 million. Suburbs and smaller cities are predictably bad when it comes to downtown parking, if they even have a downtown. So I'm not going to torture you with those, but PRN did look at a wider variety of cities, so you can investigate yourself. And I will cast a wider net when I do honorable mentions. Finally, whether something is a core city or not is a little subjective. I made my own calls, and we can debate that as we go through. Okay, that's more than enough to prime you for this, so let's get into it. First, let's count down the 10 cities with the least parking footprint as a proportion of their downtowns, starting with number 10, Oakland, California. All of these are going to have less than 15% parking lot coverage, which maybe seems like a low bar, but this is America. Also, if you're going to tell me Oakland isn't a core city, then we can't be friends. Number 9, Philadelphia. Pretty good chunk of center city here, and you can see how little off-street parking there is on most of the blocks. This is a city that just didn't get hollowed out by bad planning ideas to the same extent that a lot of older US cities did in the mid to late 20th century. Number 8, San Diego. So here's the thing. Cities where housing is expensive and land values are high, even cities that are kind of middle of the pack when it comes to car dependency, like San Diego, tend not to have a lot of surface area in their downtown that's dedicated to parking. The economics just don't support it. It's like the lowest and worst use. Number 7, Portland, Oregon. This is one where I know the comprehensive plan map pretty well, and it is wonky, but it matches up pretty well with what I think of as downtown Portland. Still way too much parking footprint around the Morrison Bridgehead, and the loop ramps are also stupid and need to go. There have been lots of redevelopment plans floated for this area, so if you know the latest, get down in the comments. Number 6, Seattle. Just had to come in one slot ahead of Portland, didn't it? Downtown shows up bordered by Denny, I-5, the stadiums, and Elliott Bay. I buy it. Another city where the land is just too valuable to not use for something better than storing people's private property. Number 5, Chicago. The definition of downtown here seems a little tight. Maybe that's going to make the parking percentage look a little rosy, but what I think should be obvious by now is the proportion of land taken up by surface parking and parking structures is a pretty good proxy for how healthy an urban environment is. These are all going to be cities that you would think of when you think of good US urbanism. Number 4, Boston. I bet you can guess the whole top 4 at this point. You know, it's not just that surface parking is a good proxy for urbanism in an abstract sense. It really shows how much impact parking policy has. If you foster an urban ecosystem where parking is more important or a more cost-effective use of land than housing or employment, you are not going to get anything that looks like central Boston. What you are going to get, we'll look at in a minute, and yes, that is a trigger warning. Number 3, DC. Just the concept of downtown DC is funny to me. Like, isn't downtown DC just Arlington, Virginia? I joke, kind of. I am tired of complaining about the publicly available satellite coverage in our nation's capital, so I'll spare you that. But this is what Street View in central DC looks like. You know, if this is considered an appropriate urban form for the elite politicians who actually make decisions about what our tax dollars get spent on, then shouldn't it be available to all their constituents? Just asking. Number 2, San Francisco. The fact that the footprint of downtown San Francisco seems comically small is, I think, kind of an indication of how disproportionate the reputation of San Francisco's urbanism is to its size. We just expect way more from San Francisco than we do from Indianapolis or Charlotte or Columbus, which is wild because those 3 cities all have higher population. And New York. Okay, I hate to critique the definition of downtown because I kind of helped come up with the methodology for this, but the reality is, if you come from just about anywhere else in the US, basically everything in Manhattan, and a lot of the outer boroughs, not to mention like Jersey City, all of these places feel like a more intense downtown type environment than exists in the quote-unquote downtown of just about any US city. And some of that is because you see very little off-street parking. So the low number, 0.4%, doesn't surprise me. In fact, I'd be shocked if it didn't come out an order of magnitude better than every other city in the US. Okay, those 10 kind of set the standard for US cities, so next I'm going to give you the 10 US cities that devote the highest proportion of valuable downtown real estate to parking. It's going to be unpleasant, but if there's any purpose to this channel at all, it's to shame the evildoers. But first, a brief reminder to click on things if you want to help propagate my nonsense to an ever wider selection of potential victims. Connect on all the usual websites, including Patreon, if you want bonus commentary and interaction. But really, I want to use this spot to point out that parking reform is absolutely a place where urbanists are moving the needle politically. And the Parking Reform Network has been in the middle of all the action, working with local partners and advocates to build capacity. Because repealing mandates is incredibly important, but parking reform is about a lot more than that. It's also about building on those wins and taking the next step, like managing our city's valuable right-of-way better and investing in walking, biking, and transit instead of like free or massively underpriced places for people to store their personal property. Anyway, I strongly encourage everyone to get involved in this movement. Everything PRN does is funded by individual donors, and I'm a member because it's an organization I've seen working for years. They didn't pay me to say any of this, it's just something I wanted to do because I really think it's that important. Well, and they gave me a cool video idea. Okay, before we shame evildoers, I'll give you one honorable. Urbanized areas under 1 million just don't do that well here, but Madison, Wisconsin is pretty special. Consider the fact that the state capital is dead center of downtown Madison, and those are often parking craters in their own right, so rare W for the Badgers. Dishonorable mention, if I had included San Juan, I think it would have been the worst on this list. I didn't include it, partly because Puerto Rico has very different economic conditions from the mainland US that that probably create way more obstacles to redevelopment. But also, if you're a tourist, what you actually probably think of as downtown, Viejo San Juan, which really is the original downtown from centuries ago, has almost no off-street parking whatsoever, so make of that what you will. Okay, the actual 10. Salt Lake City, 29% of the central city is parking, which is bad, but for some reason it looks even worse. I do expect this to get better though. The land is increasingly valuable and Salt Lake continues to make good investments in transit. Number 9, Fort Worth, Texas. There's like one strip that doesn't have parking and everything else looks like it was carpet bombed. Not a city I've ever been to, but the Metroplex is high on my list and I definitely want to take the TRE out to Fort Worth and explore. Number 8, Kansas City. I don't know if it's even fair that downtown is defined by a freeway loop, but it is aesthetically pleasing in kind of a perverse way. I honestly don't even know what to say about Kansas City anymore. I really need to go there and ride the streetcar and cleanse my palate by eating like some barbecue or something. Number 7, Detroit. This is like a list of cities I just don't feel like piling on. It's fair to say, Detroit went all in on car culture, embracing it on every possible level, and car culture simply has not loved Detroit back. Still a great city, maybe we can just call all of these opportunity sites. Number 6, Las Vegas. What'd you expect? And it is ironic because the only part of downtown Vegas that you're probably ever made aware of is a street that was made into a car-free spectacle decades ago, but there's so much more here that's ripe for redevelopment. Number 5, Anaheim. Maybe a controversial call to say this is a core city, but it's good for comedic value. To be fair, the metro area is Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim, so that's my excuse. This one kind of bucks the narrative of cities with high land values utilizing their space well, because Anaheim is not cheap. Mostly though, it's just funny because the fake downtown Disney, also in Anaheim, is probably a more pleasant downtown. Not that it doesn't have its own parking craters, they're just better concealed. Disney Springs in the Orlando area also used to be called Downtown Disney before it got rebranded. Kind of a cool car-free district with tons of its own kind of transit access, including water taxis. Just don't zoom out too far. Oh yeah, and number 4 is Orlando, Florida. I'm definitely rooting for Orlando to become more city-like, but I feel like they put a lot of political energy into widening I-4, so I don't know. Number 3, Riverside, California. One of what I'd say are 2 core cities in the Inland Empire. Really just not good. We're getting into cities that just don't even feel like cities. I've been kind of harsh on this region recently, so let's just take a short flyover of Redlands, California, which is in the eastern part of the Inland Empire. This makes me feel slightly less nauseated. Number 2, another highly confusing metro area. This is Virginia Beach, which doesn't feel like a core city, except it's got twice the population of Norfolk or any other candidate city. Most of what's defined as downtown in this analysis is just car-oriented beach uses. Like, I can't even imagine what else you would do with a long linear district that has a bunch of transportation demand, other than just putting parking everywhere. It's really the only obvious solution, and Virginia Beach has absolutely nailed it. Just fantastic work. And I regret to tell you, we have to go back to SoCal for number 1. It is San Bernardino. Just kind of a travesty. You know, in the live stream I did a couple weeks ago, someone said they had to relocate from the Pacific Northwest to the Inland Empire for work, and they wanted advice on where they should live. Might I recommend Redlands, California? And that's all I've got. Thanks for watching, and thanks as always to the patrons for supporting what I do. And special thanks to the Park and Reform Network for sending all the maps and data my way. I'm always happy to promote PRN, and I do recommend supporting them if you have the means. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.